We've learned a little bit about what soils are and their importance. Now let's dig deeper into soil to learn how it develops. We learned that soils form from sediment and organic material, but how? And what does a fully formed or developed soil even look like? Gravity and the flow of water play important roles in how soils form layers called horizons. Recall that soil forms from two main sources. First, the rock or mineral parent material that is weathered, and second, decayed organic matter. Organic matter is typically a smaller fraction of solids in soil, but it is very important for plant growth. Earlier, I mentioned that horizons are layers of soil that form as the soil develops. Similarly, a cross-section of soil that exposes these layers is called a soil profile. The development of horizons takes place as sediments weather and as organic matter that falls on the soil surface year after year breaks down and moves into the soil column. As soils develop over hundreds and thousands of years, horizons can become quite distinct. Alternatively, in areas with low rainfall or areas that are frozen much of the year, horizons may be less distinct. Of course, scientists love to name things, and so why not name soil horizons? Well, actually, it really does come in handy when you're studying soils. So let's talk about these layers. The top horizon or layer of soil is called the O horizon because it is predominantly organic matter. Humus is the name of mostly undecayed organic matter found in the O horizon. Note that humus is not spelled the same way as that delicious snack that we call hummus. As you go deeper and deeper into the soil, you will find less organic matter. As humus decomposes further, the smaller organic components are carried down from the surface with infiltrating water. This also washes minerals out of the top layers and deposits them deeper into the soil profile. The A layer, or the top soil layer, has the most organic components, and it's the most important layer of soil for plants because this layer has decomposed organic matter that's small enough to be taken up in plant roots. Thus, many fine plant roots end in the A layer, or the top soil layer. As we continue down through the soil profile, we see that roots that anchor plants may continue down into the B horizon, which is rich in minerals that have infiltrated this layer with infiltrating water, but it's not as rich in organic components. Finally, the C layer below that has many large pieces of rock from parent material, and then all of this rests on top of the mostly unweathered bedrock layer, often referred to as the R layer. So please make sure you can label these layers and understand the differences between them. Now that we know how horizons develop in general, let's talk about the 5 major factors that influence how fast and how well these horizons develop. On this slide, we see the 5 primary factors for soil formation. These include the parent material of the soil, the climate, and particularly how much temperature and precipitation the area receives, the landscape or topography of relief, so is it a flat area or it's on the side of a mountain, and how much sun exposure does it get. Biological organisms are a huge factor in how soils develop, and that includes everything, the microbes, the plants, and the animals, and even us. So we are an animal people, but we have a unique role that we play in soil erosion in particular. And also roots and the growing season affect how soils develop, and all those varying critters help to aerate soil. And then finally, time. So the more time the soil has to develop, the more developed it's going to be. So we'll discuss each of these in detail in the coming slides. Soil parent material may come from bedrock that has weathered in place, or it may come from sediments that were eroded and deposited from another location that had different bedrock. And then, of course, sometimes soils develop from a mixture of these two different sediments. Soils inherit traits from their parent material counterpart. For example, soils that form from a weathered limestone will be high in calcium. Each rock type contains a different variety of minerals, and minerals influence the chemical properties of soil. For example, the acidity of the soil. The parent material also can influence the shape and size of the sediments formed as the rocks weather. Climate plays a large role in how fast and in what ways soils develop. As summarized on the Soil Science Society of America website, soils develop faster in warm, moist climates and slowest in cold or arid ones. So this tells us that the two climatic factors that matter the most are precipitation and temperature. So let's examine a few different soils from different climates to see some examples of how this impacts soil development. So if you'll remember on the last slide, we had a picture of a desert soil. Desert soils have a thin topsoil layer and little organic matter in the topsoil layer because they have low rainfall and thus sparse vegetation on their surface. Conversely, tropical soils, as we see in the picture on the left in this slide, receive lots of rainfall, and this rainfall washes minerals deep through the soil horizon and it accelerates organic decomposition. So tropical soils have thick horizons and uniform layers because of all the leaching from water that's infiltrating the minerals and organic matter deep into the soil profile. And then if we look at permafrost soils, so soils that are frozen much of the year and that are permanently frozen at depths of greater than about 100 centimeters, these soils are going to have very little development of the horizons, and they'll have thin layers or horizons due to their short growing season. So in these soils, which are often referred to as gellisols, the plants have to have very little roots, so very short roots, and this is part of the reason that you don't see large trees growing in permafrost areas because these plants have to have very shallow, small roots. The topography or relief of a landscape impacts how soils form and develop. Soils at the bottom of slopes accumulate more water, sediments, and organic matter, and they tend to develop deeper and more distinct layers or horizons as compared to soils that are developing on slopes. So if you think about it, soils on slopes are subject to greater erosion as runoff from precipitation runs quickly down these slopes. And since runoff is greater than infiltration, soil development is limited. Also, soils on these steep slopes, they have lots of oxygen and less water in them because the water is all running off. And because of this, they have minerals with ferric iron or iron 3+, which are reddish, so like rusty minerals. And then in lowlands where water accumulates, it can push out air and oxygen, and it's more saturated, so the minerals there have ferrous iron or iron 2+, which are gray, green, or like a dark color. So in this series of photos that we see here, these are soil cross sections, and it's showing soils at the bottom of a mountain in a drainage way on the very left side of the picture. So there's 5 soils. The left side is the bottom of the slope and the drainage way. And then as you go to the right, you're going up the slope, and then the summit is on the very right. So the soils at the bottom, they have more distinct layers, and then the bottom layer is that gray greenish color. But as you progress up the slope, the soils become less gray and more red, and also they have less distinct horizons. So we said that living organisms play a very large role in soil development, and we'll discuss all the different ways in this slide in not a lot of detail, but some detail. So the organisms in this slide play very different roles in soil development. Animals, we tend to blend and mix soils and aerate them, and also animals supply organic matter, which helps with nutrient cycling. Plants that are growing in the soil weather rocks into sediments. They fix carbon from the atmosphere via photosynthesis, and they supply soils with carbon in the form of sugars from the photosynthesis. Plant roots also help hold soil in place to prevent erosion. Microorganisms, they perform a lot of different functions, and this would, an example of this would be bacteria that live on the roots of plants, and that's shown in this image on the slide on the bottom right. And so these are important for decomposing organic matter so it can transform from humus into smaller organic components that infiltrate that soil column. These microbes also alter the mineral composition of rock sediments, which is important for nutrient cycling and mineral erosion. And finally, they convert nitrogen gas from the atmosphere into soluble forms of nitrogen that can be taken up as plants. And nitrogen isn't necessary for plant growth. So it's easier for us to remember how important soil microbes are when we remind ourselves that there are between 1 million and 1 billion bacteria per gram of soil on average. Time is the final soil formation factor. Soils take hundreds to thousands of years to develop initially, so to get some horizons forming, but the older the soil, the more developed it is. So soils that are less than about 100,000 years old are still relatively new and they're still developing, but as soils get older and thicker and more established, they remain relatively stable unless the climate changes significantly. And that's the end of this lecture.